The French Chef is made possible by a grant from Hills Brothers Coffee Incorporated and a grant from the Polaroid Corporation.
I'm serving lunch in the kitchen today in this lovely sunny room. The only thing that's missing is the food and you, because you're invited to lunch today on The French Chef. Welcome to The French Chef. I'm Julia Child. You know, a lot of people I know are just horrified when they think they're going to have guests for lunch. They don't mind guests for breakfast. That's easy. You just have ham and eggs. And they don't mind guests for dinner because you always have a set main course, such as roast pheasant stuffed with foie gras. And when I think lunch is a great deal of fun, and you don't have to be elaborate. By that, I don't mean you have a chicken sandwich and some canned soup. I mean, you can have so many awfully nice little main courses, and that's where the French are always awfully good at that. They have, of course, you have soufflés and egg dishes, and I'm going to suggest to you today a wonderful little cheesy dish called a ramequin forestière. It's very quick to make, and whenever you see anything on a menu that says forestière, that means in the manner of the forester's wife. And she always has mushrooms where she lives in the forest. So it usually means something with mushrooms. And these have to be chopped up, minced up very fine, and then they're going to be sautéed. And when you want mincing, you want a great big sharp knife. And if you think one sharp blade is good, 3 are even better. Here is a great 3-bladed rocker chopping knife, which I got the last time we were in France. And this works very nicely indeed. This is used by chefs in restaurants. And you see it just rocks back and forth, and the 3 blades cut much faster than one. And if the mushrooms stick up in the blade, you just push them down again. Remember when I was taking cooking lessons in Paris, my old chef was very particular about things. I get the mushrooms all chopped up. And then I'd say, "Voilà, chef, les champignons, ça va?" And he'd look at me and he'd say, "Non, madame, non, 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 non. C'est pas assez fin. Continuez." In other words, when you're mincing up mushrooms, they're supposed to be in pieces that are about 1/8 of an inch thick, 1/8 of an inch all around. And so I think with this big chopper, they go pretty well. In this case, because I'm not going to take all day at it. If I have any big pieces, by the time I'm through, I'll just save them for something else. This really means about 1/8 to 1/16 of an inch that you have to go chop, 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 chop. Actually, I think the sound of the great big knife chopping is rather nice because it always reminds one of good cooking and of France. So there, those mushrooms are fine enough because my chef isn't looking. And so now they're ready to be sautéed. And these are going to be sautéed in butter. But as always, when it says sautéed in butter, that means that you sauté also with a little bit of oil because that fortifies the butter so that it won't burn so fast. And for this, I'm going to sauté about a cup of chopped fresh mushrooms. And for this recipe, it doesn't make very much difference how many mushrooms you use. And those are I'm using a no-stick pan as always, and you notice when you saute mushrooms that at first they seem to get damp as they're in the pan, and then after they've sat in the pan for a little while, they have begun to saute, the pieces begin to separate from each other. So you want to saute them until they have separated from each other, and they've done. It'll take 3 or 4 minutes. And to flavor them up, I'm going to put in just a little bit of chopped shallots or scallions, about a tablespoon there. And then I'll just stir them around a bit. They don't need a great deal of butter, particularly in a no-stick pan. And And then while these are finishing, I'm just going to put them over on a slightly slower burner and get on with the rest of our first course. This is called a ramequin forestier, and that's ramequin spelled R as in roast pheasant, A-M-E-Q-U-I-N, and it's a cousin of the soufflé and of puff pastry, of cream puffs, but it's quite different. But it does start out with a very thick sauce, and then you mix eggs and cheese with it and put it in a baking dish, and it bakes in the oven. And I'm using here a 1/2 cup of granular, that no-sift type of flour, and that goes into a big pan. And then I'm gradually beating 2 cups of milk into it. That's a nice thing about this granular flour. When you add liquid to it, cold liquid, it doesn't lump up the way regular flour does. And then this is set over heat, and I add the rest of the milk. I'm going to make 2 cups of thick sauce in all. Now we're always making thick sauces, and this is a different type. It's a reverse from the from our old friend Mother Velouté, which starts out with flour and butter cooked together, and then you have the liquid. This one just has the flour and the liquid, which are brought to a boil, and the technical name for this sauce is a bouillie, or that comes from boil, B-O-U-I-L-L-I. And this just has to come up from the boil to the boil. And what we're making this dish enough to serve 4 to 6 people with our 2 cups of very thick sauce. You can also make a soufflé with a bouillie sauce. While this is stirring with one hand, I'm going to take a look at my mushrooms, shaking them with the other. When you're doing this sauce, be sure that you have a thick bottom pan, because you don't want it to burn on the bottom. And then as it comes up to the boil, it's going to thicken. And the steam is coming up, so now it's practically boiling. If you're using regular flour, which you could in this, a 1/2 cup of regular flour, you would find that as it began coming up to the boil, it would just get terribly lumpy. But as long as you have a wire whip and you're stirring it, you just, if it begins getting lumpy, just beat it fast. Now let's see, that is almost. Now can you see some great big bubbles coming up there? That's the boil. Sort of great plump things, and that's all it needs. So then take that off heat, and then it gets 3½ tablespoons of butter in it. And that's about 3½ tablespoons. So in that goes. And then it gets 4 whole eggs. As you can see, this is a much easier thing than a soufflé. You beat the eggs in one at a time into the hot sauce. Just beat it around. I think this method of cracking the egg and opening it with one hand is a very good idea. You see, you just break it and then pull it apart with your fingers that way. Once in a while you get a little shell in, but it's so much fun to open them this way that I don't really care if I do get some shell in. But if you give it a sharp crack and a sharp opening, you're all right. And that just gets fully beaten up, and that is all there is to that, except for some seasoning and some cheese. So that's about as quick a mixture as I can think of. And now we want salt and pepper and some nutmeg and some cheese. Now we're going to have 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Now one thing that I hate to use in this, I have to, are these nasty little measuring spoons, because it takes so long. And you can learn to measure in your hand, and the way to do that, because this saves a lot of time for things like this where the proportions aren't madly important. Put in a 1/2 teaspoon in your 1/2 teaspoon thing, and then pour it into the palm of your hand. And then get familiar with how much that fills of the palm of your hand. And then that's how much a 1/2 teaspoon of salt is. So there, I want 1/2 teaspoon of salt. So I just pour it in, and there you are. Well, that just means a little bit of practice. And then we want some pepper, about 2 or 3 good grinds of pepper. And then some nutmeg. And if you don't have one of these little nutmeg graters, you can use a whole nutmeg. And what we want is une pointe de muscade, or a point of nutmeg. Just take a little knife and scratch the nutmeg. And you can see it going in. And when they say a pointe, that means they just want a little tiny bit, because you never should be conscious that nutmeg is in there. You should just know that it is something very nice. Then we have about a cup of grated Swiss cheese. And that, again, if you get used to what about a cup looks like when something isn't vastly important as to exactly the proportions, then you can save an awful lot of time. So there is your ramekin mix all done, and you can bake it just the way it is, pouring it into a baking dish, or you can have a nice little filling with it, and that's what these forestières or mushrooms are for. So there are now our mushrooms again. And these are done enough. See, the pieces are beginning to separate from each other, but they haven't browned. They're just sort of on the verge of browning. And you can use these just as they are with a little salt and pepper. Sprinkle a little salt in and a little bit of pepper. And they'll have a very nice flavoring along with the shallots or scallions that went in. But you can, if you want to cream them, which is a little more fancy and a very nice, you can put in a bit of flour, possibly about a tablespoon, and stir that around for a moment, and then put some cream in. This is useful to do anytime you want to make a little quick first course, like cream mushrooms on toast. Now the flour's gone in and it's cooked just a moment, and then pour in a little bit of heavy cream and let that cook down. Then you can pour in a little bit more. It just depends on how soft you want it. And this is just about the way it should be. So there, you really have 2 recipes in one: creamed mushrooms as well as the mushroom for fillings. And then you're now all ready to assemble your ramekin. And the nice thing about it is that you can cook your mushrooms ahead of time. I think the sauce is so quick to do that there's no sense in doing that ahead of time, because, heavens, that only took just about 5 minutes, but you could certainly get the mushrooms done if you wanted to. And rather than mushrooms, you could use chicken livers or cooked vegetables in butter. And you could also add some parsley to the mushrooms just to give a little more color. But you could use anything as a filling, as you will see when this mixture goes in. And there's an oven-proof baking dish, and you always want to butter this just with softened butter. And then half of this ramekin mixture goes in to the dish, and then the filling goes on top of that. If you didn't want any filling, you just pour the whole mixture right in. So there's half of it. And then the mushrooms go on. Just try to spread them as evenly as possible. I like them really better cream than not, but if you're on a diet, you don't have to put the cream in. This is a very French business of doing things in layers. I always seem to like that, because with something very simple, somehow having a layer seems to make it a little more fancy. Then see, there's your ramekin mixture just going right on top, covering up the mushrooms. You could call this a ramekin en surprise, or a big surprise, because nobody will know what's inside of it. Asparagus would be nice, shellfish, shrimps, almost all kinds of things. You just can use your own imagination on that. Then on top of it goes a little more cheese. And this you can put on as much or as little as you want. I'd say about 3 or 4 tablespoons of cheese. And then so that it will brown nicely, just put a little bits of softened butter on top. Or you could have hard butter cut into dots, but it's very much easier to put on the softened butter, as you can see. And then you have this all done. You can do this, say, 2 days ahead of time, and then just leave it in the refrigerator, and you can bake it whenever you're ready. So that's one nice thing about a lot of these luncheon dishes. You can do it all ahead, so that when you have nothing but just to do but to stick things into the oven when you're ready to go. So at this point, I'm ready to go. So this is going to go into a 400-degree oven in the upper third. And this will take about 25 to 30 minutes to bake. I have another one in here, and we're going to see how that's coming along. And look here. See, this needs another few minutes. It's risen up and it's browned nicely. And it's going to rise up a little bit more. But it sinks down a bit after it's as soon as it's cooked. So you want to be sure that you time it. And if you made it once, use the same dish every time you do it so you know exactly how much time it takes. And also, if you've done it ahead of time and had it in the refrigerator, it will be cooled off, so it would probably take 5 minutes or so longer than you think. I usually find with these dishes, this takes 25 minutes in a 400 oven. But as soon as it's puffed and brown, as you see farther on, when this is puffed a little bit more, it is ready to serve. And now, we have the problem of dessert. Of course, you can, if you're not being elaborate at all, you can just serve plain fresh fruit and cheese. But we can't serve cheese this time because we have cheese in our ramequin. So we will serve some sliced orange that is covered with candied orange peel. And this candied orange peel is very easy to make. You just take good, fresh, firm, fine oranges with bright red skins and cut off just the orange part with a vegetable peeler. And don't get any more of the white than you possibly can. And then you cut it. We want to cut it into matchstick sizes like this, and that's called a julienne. And for this, gather 3 peels together, and then take your chopping knife and just cut right down to make very little fine strips. And if you've done your knife practicing the way one should, you'll find that you can do this very quickly indeed. But you want to make these just as fine as possible, really the size of a matchstick. Then when you have these all done, say we were serving sliced oranges for 4 people, you'll probably want 6 oranges and maybe probably 6 peel. And then when you have your orange peel all done, you want to blanch it, which means to boil it for simmer it for about 10 minutes until it's soft, and then you taste it. And it's soft and it's lost its bitterness, and then it's ready to be candied. And for that, you have to make a sugar syrup. Now, this is another thing that people seem to be worried about. Anytime they say that you're going to have a sugar syrup, they're just horrified. They say, oh, I couldn't possibly do that. How could I ever wash the pot out anyway when it was done? And so on and so forth. But these sugar syrups are so easy to do, which this includes caramel and other things, that you shouldn't have any fear of it. For this, I'm going to use 1 cup of sugar and 1/3 cup of water. When you're ever going to boil sugar into a syrup, you always have, for every 1 cup you use, you have 1/3 cup of water, because you have to have the water so the sugar will dissolve. Now, this is about the most important point here of the early stage of your boiling, in which you can run into trouble. Now, for one rule is never stir it. Always just take the pan by the handle and swirl it around, because your great danger in boiling sugar is that the sugar will crystallize. And if you get the sugar, you see it's cloudy now, and as soon as it begins to come up to the boil, that liquid will clear. And if you just stand right over it swirling your pan this way, you still notice it just as soon as it's boiled for about, 2 or 3 seconds, that this whole liquid will suddenly clear. And if you allow it to clear this way, then you won't run into any trouble of having that crystallization. See, that's still cloudy, but then shake it a little bit again. And suddenly she clears up. There. You see, that is clear in the pan. And then at that point, we're going to boil this to about the hard boil stage. And you have another problem, is that the sugar evaporating on the sides of the pan can also form crystals. So put a cover on. And the moisture from the top of the pan will fall down into the pan and melt the sugar crystals. So do this for about a minute or two, and this is boiling over high heat. And while that's doing that for a minute or two, we will do some orange segments. You want to be sure and stay right near your sugar so that nothing untoward will happen. I'm cutting off the 2 ends of the oranges, and then with a very sharp stainless steel knife, just exposing the flesh. In French, this is called à vif, or à nu. À nu means naked. The naked flesh of the orange. They're always much more, I think, exact in their terms than we are. You want to be sure that you get all of this white off. You could, of course, use sliced oranges, but I think the segments, though a little bit more work and a little bit more extravagant, are much more elegant. And then again, with your sharp knife, cut between the skin sections so that you free the orange. And this you would also use for, I better look at my sugar and stop talking so much. Now, you notice the bubbles here. They're large, and they make sort of a slightly oily sound. And at this point, we may have almost come to the soft ball stage. When you put a spoon in, it coats the spoon, and then have some water right near and drop some in. And as soon as you can pick it up in your hand, that has come to that stage. Just as well I stopped talking and looked at it. See, now I've picked that up there, and that's between the soft and the hard ball. And that's just about what we want this sugar to be. Now see, that's terribly easy to do. So just remember that business about making sure the sugar dissolves, covering it for a while, and then keep watching it, and then testing it this way. You can use a sugar thermometer if you want, but I think it's a good thing to see and feel how it is. And if you're using a thermometer, you want to be sure that the bulb is right in the syrup. Well, it isn't deep enough for the bulb to go into the syrup. And now when you've come to that stage, you put your orange peel in to your syrup, and then you want that to cook rather slowly because the orange peel has been wet because you blanched it. And you want to let your sugar syrup cook down a little bit with the peel so that it is again a rather thick syrup, and it also very slightly candies the peel. So I'll let that finish cooking. And now, if you were using the thermometer, this would be the softball. I can't remember, because I don't use it. I think it's 248. Anyway, it says on the thermometer what the temperature is. And now another objection people use as an excuse for not cooking this cooking sugar syrup is, oh, it's so difficult to get the pan clean. Well, there's nothing easier than getting the pan clean. All you do is fill the pan with water and put the water also in your spoon, and then just bring it to the simmer for 3 or 4 minutes, and then all the sugar melts off. And so now, after you've let that boil down, you then pour it over your oranges. And this will be hot, but that makes no difference. This is really, the peel is just delicious when it's cooked this way. And of course, you don't need any sugar on your oranges because you have your sugar syrup. And then after you have your peel on your oranges, you then want to chill it in the refrigerator. And you can chill for, oh, let's see, I don't know where I'm going to put that. You can chill it for 2 or 3 hours. And these are called les oranges glacées. Because they're glazed with the orange peel. And now I think our ramekin is ready, so I'm going to take it out. There you are. You see that's risen nicely, and it's nice and brown, and it is ready to serve. And at this point, you want to serve it immediately because it will begin to sink down a little bit. This is actually sunk a little tiny bit because I think it was practically done when you saw it. And with the ramekin, it has the same consistency of a souffle, but it's not quite. It's hard to describe. It's like itself, but it has a lovely light quality. And with this, as a main course, you could have watercress and tomato salad and French bread and a nice Alsatian wine like a Gewürztraminer. And then when you've eaten that all up, you are ready to have your dessert. And rather than having just plain orange glacé, you can serve the oranges with a fruit ice. Surround them with it, which is very nice indeed. So I have here a pineapple ice, which in French would be called a glace aux ananas. And so the name of this dessert then with the oranges around it would be a glace aux ananas aux oranges glacées, which I must say sounds very fancy indeed. And then just put the oranges all around the dessert. This really makes a very pretty concoction. And the way I molded this pineapple ice, I just put it in a little bowl, and then dipped the bowl in hot water, and then just unmolded it. And I'm going to put a little bit of les oranges glacées on top, so that really looks very nice, I think. And the nice thing about these oranges is that you can also, you can use this orange peel over ordinary cut-up fruit, or you can use it for, the orange peel you can use for decoration of a cake or a pudding, and then along with your orange ice cream, you could serve almond cookies, which would be very nice indeed. Well, I think this looks like a splendid meal with the ramequin forestière and glace aux ananas aux oranges glacées. Actually, I think I'll take off my apron and join it myself. That's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit.
Julia Child is co-author of the book, Mastering the Art of French Cooking.